After full-level gangster rebirth author, Kuntur copywriting as the second cannon fodder in a fairy tale, Peu was disappointed, used, pushed down from the 10,000 demon cave, and degenerated into a human being and a ghost or a ghost. In the end, she finally fell into a demon, returned from the Hades, and returned all those who lost her. After coming back to life, Peu just wanted to be a villain quietly, by the way, to protect his own wastewood master who laughed harmlessly. Well, wait. Master, how did you become the first sword repairman? Are you a waste? Huebo wore a book of fairy tales. The book is not a serious book, the male lead and the female lead are awesome, only the second female is the virgin. And she became the second female master, and at the beginning of the story, she died with nothing left of cannon fodder. Pointing to the fact that there are still hundreds of years from the beginning of the plot, she decided to practice hard first to become a Thai, and by the way, help the little apprentice to correct other people's problems. Hey? Why is this little apprentice different from the book? Pei he is cruel jade, master is a waste of wood, I must protect her. Why first Jiangzihubo, the apprentice is a virgin, I must educate her well. Crowd, eat melon, crowd, and people, two full-level bosses team up to abuse vegetables, who can survive this? Pei Yu originally thought that after a new life, the worst would be a devastating end. But she had never thought that there would be someone who opened her hands to her after she had gone through the robbery and was covered with scars. He smiled and said, "Hey, I spoil you." Revered Master X refined and unloved apprentice, the first female is born again, and the second female wears books. The two heroines are out of the sky, and they rely on their ability to he. Content tag, Chiang Xian Xia comprehension rebirth wearing book search keywords, protagonist, Huibei, Pu supporting role others, one sentence introduction, rebirth meets Chuanshu. Black clouds rolled like ink, and white rain jumped on beads, splashing on the eaves. Several people huddled under the eaves to shelter from the rain. A young man in Jinbao looked up at the heavy black clouds, with a smile but not a smile, and said, "Looking at this posture, isn't there someone who can overcome the catastrophe?" As soon as the voice fell, the thunder snake wandered in the clouds, and the electric light shone, reflecting everyone's faces blue and white. After stiffening for a while, the seemingly older man in King Bao sighed, "Don't say that, everyone knows that the tribulation of heaven is the punishment of heaven. It can overcome the tribulation, the scorched earth, where the thunder tribulation affects, no life can escape. If someone really crosses the calamity here, do we still have a way to survive?" The teenager curled his lips, disdainfully, "Is it so mysterious? Zuzi is ignorant." The man in King Bao pointed to the dark shadow that was mostly covered by the dark clouds in the distance, "Do you know what that is?" Everyone followed and looked over. Splashing ink world, misty clouds. The mountains hidden behind the clouds are plain white, and the top of the mountain is covered with snow, and the wind and frost are endless. Staring for a long time, you can see the ghosts, and the sound of mourning and weeping sounded in the ears. As a drop of cold water fell into the boiling oil, everyone was shocked and scrambled to discuss it. What is this? Just now I saw people, no, ghosts in there. They were crying. Isn't it summer? Why is it still snowing there? Am I dazzled? The King Bao man coughed a few times, with a slight complacency, and said slowly, 400 years ago, the Gushan Suanman was also very prosperous. Within 1,000 miles, no matter the family or the street commoner, you can enter. Suanman is proud to be a disciple of the outer sect. If the ancestors of Xiu are lucky enough to enter the 6 peaks, that would be ascending to the sky in one step, and even the emperor of the secular world can ignore it. It's just a pity that Dixuanman was guilty to the heavens and sent a punishment from heaven. None of the 3,000 disciples survived, and they were trapped in this square inch of land. The pain of being ordered to perish day and night. He looked up. Looking at the lonely mountain covered by wind and snow, and the lonely mountain where life and death are blocked, is always covered with frost. At this point, many people are puzzled, since it is the gate of cultivating immortals, the towering method of walking, and the blessing of heaven. How can you suddenly suffer this misfortune? The man in King Bao sighed again, because of one person. He looked around and saw that everyone was confused, and when he cleared his throat and was about to speak, he suddenly stopped. The Jinyi boy quit. Hey! Don't lose your appetite. The man in King Bao ignored him and stared at the corner. The woman is looking up, standing under the eaves listening to the rain. Her surroundings were empty, with nothing but mist and wind and rain. She stood among the world, as if she was beyond the mundane world. Girl, do you know why? The King Bao man bowed his hand and asked respectfully. The woman tilted her head and looked over here. Everyone couldn't help taking a breath. Her face was mottled, as if it had been bitten by something, covered with blood-red scars, and nothing was intact. Only the eyes, like double autumn water, glanced lightly through the mist of water vapor, and it was like a hot star, scorching people's hearts unconsciously. The woman's pale paper lips moved slightly. Her voice was rough and weird, and her words were illegible, just like when a babbled child opened her mouth for the first time. Everyone was stunned before distinguishing the two words as Pu. Then there was a long silence. No one dared to discuss the blood demon with Jade. The man in King Bao revealed his identity at this moment. I'm telling you everyone, I was a disciple of the outer sect of Gushan, and I went home to visit relatives on the day of the punishment, so I could escape this calamity. For hundreds of years, every day, I will always come back for condolences. He looked at the wailing ghost from a distance, and raised his hand to wipe the water from the corner of his eye. I don't know when the brothers and sisters will be able to escape from this misery and enter the cycle again. The boy frowned. Then, blood demon, what does it have to do with Gushan? Why is the punishment related to her? The King Bao man was silent for a long time before slowly saying, 400 years ago, the blood demon Pu was a disciple on the Shaoxian peak of the Gushan mountain. It was my senior sister. Everyone sighed. Who would have thought that the blood demon of the heavenly Dao sect who killed people without blinking, was actually a disciple of the immortal sect? Senior sister Pu has a peerless appearance and unparalleled qualifications. She has built her foundation for 10 years and has 100 years of pill formation. She is more compassionate and treats us outside disciples with gentleness. At that time, we called her fairy outside the cloud, and Baiyu was flawless. Beyond the clouds, everyone in the world praises it. Some people didn't believe it, and retorted, then how can she become a blood demon? The man in King Bao said melancholy, in my year, the senior sister saved a woman in the land of every demonic. The land of every devil? The cultivator Yuan Ying has been in for a life of 9 deaths. How capable is your senior sister and can save people in it? The man in King Bao smiled. His eyes were half reminiscence, half sorrow. Of course not ordinary monks, but she is a jade. Everyone was silent again. Judging yin and yang with only one hand, a stroke of life and death, if that person is not against the heavens and become a devil, he will definitely be a stunning talent in the realm of cultivation. The predecessors couldn't do it, but if she is Pu, it seems to become a matter of course. The man in King Bao looked up at the miserable wind and rain in the sky, and sighed, that woman is outstanding, and the senior sister met her very happily and regarded her as irresistible. Later, the woman was seriously injured and needs nothing to save her life. Mythical beasts have no glory. The man in King Bao nodded. The beast Hua, who is instructed by the sky, is connected to the luck of Gushan. The woman tricked the senior sister into stealing Hua, using their hands to design it to cramp and peel it. Everyone took a breath. Born in the sky, the Hua divine beast, which was bred for thousands of years, died so miserably. The beast died with hatred, and Gushan was guilty of heaven. 3,674 disciples were innocent and dragged down. Their deaths are hard to equal the anger of the sky, and their souls are not reincarnated. Hearing this, some people were indignant, who is that wicked woman? It is so vicious. The King Bao man looked around, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. If you say she, you are all very familiar. That woman got the inner pill of the beast, cultivated for 1,000 miles, and 100 years later, she became the first person in the immortal world, established a sect, and named Tiandao. The crowd was full of noise. What nonsense are you talking about? Sui Han Xianzun is the most glamorous Jiu, how could it be possible to do such a thing? Someone said, I think you are clearly a gore fiend, you are talking about such a strange thing. I want to disturb people's hearts. The man in King Bao just smiled melancholy. 400 years have passed, black and white are reversed, good and evil are reversed, and even the sky is blinded. But there are always people who will never forget. If what you said is true, isn't the blood demon very innocent? Jin Yi Boy frowned and asked. The woman suddenly walked into the wind and rain, the black robe agitated, the stars and temples wetted by the rain, quietly hung down on the side of her face. She has no eyes and can't know people clearly, so that she pays for her evil consequences, harms others and herself, and is not innocent. Everyone saw her standing alone, her body and shadow hung with each other, and her voice was sad and hopeless, like a Chonghong weeping blood, and their hearts were shocked. When the lingering figure died in the rain, they woke up. Who is this person? King Bao's expression is solemn, no one knows the old things about Gushan. If anyone else is so familiar, then probably only. He leaned down and made a long stroke in the direction where the woman was leaving. Piyu walked slowly up the snow-covered stone steps. Just like when she first entered the Suanmen. On the 1,000 sections of heaven, there are many bones. At the time of the punishment, he was starting to practice. The children who are full of hope for the future climbed up step by step, looking at the end immediately, when suddenly the black cloud topped and the thunder shook. To the last moment of their lives, these young children still struggled to escape from this tomb. They want to live. After Peu's walk, Bai Bone trembles with snow on his body, and stands up swayingly, following her in silence. After the ranks, it is the Dao Tai. The jade platform was slumped, and the old banners were dyed blood red, some were still blowing in the wind, and some were rotten in the soil. At the four corners of the high platform, the four white bones were sitting cross-legged, the robe on his body was not rotted, and there was a little blood on his front. Seeing her coming, the bones also swayed and stood upright, following the cue. Peu walked up to the questioning platform and placed his hand on the questioning stone that was still shining white. Everything in front of me suddenly became grey, and then the clouds opened and rained, and it suddenly became clear. On the lonely mountain, the green hills and green trees are very beautiful. A group of high-spirited teenagers flew over here with clouds. Peu, what are you still doing here? The morning meeting is about to come here. They smiled among the clouds and waved to her. Peu raised his head, and thousands of sword lights rose from the peaks, passing through the air like a massive meteor shower. The young people above the flying sword, with the shining light above their heads and the sea of clouds with their feet, smiled wantonly and brilliantly. Peu retracted his hand. Zanmu is full of miserable wind and snow all over the world, urging to break the heart. Prosperous and magnificent, all eyes are empty, for 400 years, it has become a dream. She looked back at the long line of white bones behind her. In the old days, the young boy was full of clouds, full of spirits, and dared to try to compare with the heavens, but now, there are thousands of miles of clouds, thousands of mountains and snow, and the desolate soul is heavy, and only the shadows are lingering. Do you hate me? The low voice immediately disappeared in the whimpering wind. The bones opened their black eyes and looked at her quietly. Damn it, Peu thought. I hate her for having eyes and no pearls, and having a bad heart, and hurting the lives of 3,000 Gushan disciples. She was pushed down from the 10,000 demon cave by her best friend at the time of the tribulation of Gushan. You owe me this, Sui Han's eyes were full of disgust. Can you pay me back for the lives of my parents and relatives? Can you? You owe me. At the bottom of 10,000 demon cave, 10,000 demon devours the heart, there is death but no life. 400 years later, he became the master of the heavenly Dao sect and the first person in the immortal world. However, the unjust soul of Gushan still suffers from the punishment of heaven day and night, and will never be released. Until the night of wind and rain, someone crawled out of the devil's cave, brought tens of thousands of demon soldiers, against the laws of the heavens, and washed the heavens with blood. The ice muscle and bones are no longer, and the face is hideous like a ghost. The fairy outside the cloud is dead, and the blood demon is born with hatred. Pu walked up to Shaoxian Peak, followed by a long string of dead souls. The sky was thundering, the dark clouds were overwhelming, and the rain seemed to be getting heavier. 400 years ago, Shaoxian Peak was Changchun during the 4 seasons, and it was a verdant green, among the rustling flowers and leaves, ying ying yan yan tweeting. Peak owner Huibo doesn't like to practice hard, doesn't like wind and snow, but is fascinated by the fragrance of birds, flowers, wine, and delicacies, not like a sword repairer. Pu looked at the thick layer of frost above the green leaves, thinking, Master will be unhappy to see Shaoxian Peak become like this. Her footsteps paused, and she continued to walk forward unhurriedly. Master will not be angry. Master, I love her most. It was just a drop of red water running down the corner of the eye, and it immediately condensed into ice when it fell on the ground. At the top of the peak, the wind and snow roared, hunting in black. Pu swipes casually. A long river fell from 9 days, and slowly flowed past her eyes. The thunder sounded louder, and it seemed that the sky was roaring unwillingly. I was the one who attracted Huang Chuan, so what can you do to me? Pei Yu turned around and made a way out. The bones behind him slowly walked into the yellow spring following her guidance. Do you hate me? She asked again. Naturally, the bones will not answer. Pu's expression turned, and a scarlet light flashed in her eyes. They naturally hate you. She licked the corners of her lips and replied. What right do you have to ask for forgiveness for a person like you? She covered her head. I don't know, I really don't know. I didn't mean it. It's ridiculous, can you push all the responsibility away without purpose? They all died for you, they died for you. The wind and snow became more intense, and the ghosts seemed to be infected with her emotions, and they all mourned and wept. Pu knelt on the ground, supporting the ground with her hands. Stop talking, please, stop talking. Suddenly, the wind stopped abruptly and everything fell silent. Pei Yu looked up foolishly. The woman in front of her smiled gently and harmlessly, her hands folded in her sleeves, her eyebrows were like curved feathers, and her voice was like a pearl falling on a jade plate. When I see a gentleman, don't who Pu. The scene in front of me has become more than 400 years ago. In the spring rain, a woman with a green feather and green shirt has a long body and a jade standing, half leaning under the flower tree, with a branch of rusty spring flower folded in her hand. Long smiles are wide, and the fairy wind blows the jade. The woman stared at the flower branch in her hand and sighed, Pu. Master, Master. She called tremblingly. The spring rain became ice, the spring flowers withered, and the woman became an ignorant bone, standing in front of her blankly. Master has been dead for 400 years. Pu turned her head and watched Bai Gu stepping into the yellow spring idiotically. Master, after you enter the cycle of reincarnation, remember to vote for a good person, don't cultivate immortality anymore. If there is an afterlife, I will protect you and protect you for the rest of your life. After the last injustice was over, Huang Chuan flowed into the underworld again. In the independent wind and snow of Pu, he removed all the devilish energy from his body, and covered all his cultivation base on the ground with a radius of 100 miles. When the thunder roar came, Pu closed his eyes. After the 99 sky thunders passed, the clouds and the rain were swayed, and Kateru Yu Ming, everything was fine. The great power crosses the calamity, hundreds of miles of scorched earth, the great devil crosses the calamity, without hurting a tree. The wind and snow that had been raging in the lone mountain for 400 years finally stopped. A kingfisher flew tired and stopped on the snow-covered branch, tweeting a few times. As if going back to 400 years ago, after the first wind and snow, the young girls shook their heads and read in the bookstore how erratic is the world on earth. If you see fire from a rock, you can watch the electricity through the gap. The firefly extinguishes when it sees the morning, and it disappears when it sees the Sunday. Leave nothing. Pu felt someone suffocating on her face. She opened her eyes abruptly, and met a pair of big copper bell-like eyes. Pu was shocked, her body stiff, her limbs were rusty, and she almost stopped breathing. Tongling's eyes also jumped, slapped his hooves, raised his neck and yelled, "Moo-moo! Here it is!" Pu looked right and left, the crumbling thatched shed, so broken that you could see the large sky of rotten roofs, a few bundles of dry straw lying around, and the little scalper that kept pouting in front of him, and finally came to a conclusion, "Here it is, the cowshed where I lived when I was young." She lowered her head and looked at her arm, as thin as two bone-truncated bones. She could not pinch a thin layer of skin with her fingers, and it was covered with various bruises. He stood up and jumped twice without breaking his leg. He should be 8 years old now. Before she was 8 years old, her mother was still held in a bullpen. At the age of 8.5, she was interrupted by a villager. "Now that my mother is not there and my leg hasn't been broken, he is 8 years old." Pu squinted her eyes and slightly raised her lips. "If you wait 10 years later, this laugh will be praised as a bright moon and clear breeze, and you will forget the vulgar when you see it. But now, no matter how dirty the cheeky faces are, they are not pretty." 8 years old is really a good age, Pu thought. 6 months later, Suhan left Yankan and went to the St. Zhuangziuxian. A year later, Gushin's introductory trial started, and she worshipped under the door of Huibo. But now, everything hasn't started, like a lump of clay in front of her, how to knead the sculpture is entirely up to her heart. Pu's lips are whiter. Really happy. She didn't know why she was born again, but after learning the Tao for a long time, she always had a stable attitude towards such strange things. I still remember that when she first entered Suanmen, she heard Huibei talk about the Tao Te Ching. Speaking of chapter 32, the main road is everywhere, it can be left and right. Huibo asked her if you know what it means. Xiao Pu shook his head, and was immediately knocked hard. "Do you know why I beat you?" Huibo asked her with a grin. Xiao Pu touched the red mark on her forehead, her eyes flickered. "Is it because of my ignorance?" Huibei smiled happily. "Come on, let me tell you, what this sentence means is that the way of heaven is a lunatic, and everything can be done. You walk on the road and you are suddenly struck to death by a thunder, or it was a treasure chest that fell from the sky and smashed you to death. This is all normal. We cultivators, we must have a stable mind, you know." Xiao Pu nodded and asked, "But why are you hitting me?" Huibo thumped her violently again, looked at the wronged child, smiled and said, "Being a teacher is doing my best to preach to you." Later, Pu understood that the way of heaven is the same as the master, and they cannot be guessed by common sense. In a word, it is that the brain is sick and digging pits everywhere. As a person who falls into the pit, his mentality must be as stable as a rock, so that the mountain collapses and the color remains unchanged. The sound of firecrackers came from outside the door, overwhelming, and crackling, making her ears hurt. Pu pushed open the wooden door that was only half broken, and the cold wind slashed her face. She didn't have a bodyguard right now, and she couldn't help but shivered, her teeth smashing. The sight outside is really weird. The sky is dull, cloudy, and windy, day is like night. Several red lights passed across the horizon and exploded in the night sky. On the black night, one after another flowers bloomed like brocade. Pu raised her head and looked at the sky, with a pensive look on her face. This is a firework-like thing, its name is Chuanyun Qiling, which is made from the feathers of the legendary phoenix. Mortals holding this thing can send out help from the immortal gate. But Qiling is not common, and Yankin can own this thing because of his good age, and he was favored by a certain elder of Shengren Zhuang early. Now that 10 flaming feathers have been released one after another, could it be that something major has happened? But in her memory, there was no such time. Pu tightened her lips and walked out of the bullpen slowly. The little scalper ran over with his hoofs and followed her. Every family smoked, but the door was wide open. There was no one in the room. The food had not been moved. It was placed on the table. It seemed that they had encountered something with the meal and all ran out. The fire was a little bit in the southeast direction, and the figures shook, and the villagers should have gathered at the ancestral hall. Pu swaggered to a house. There was a plate of fried pork with chili on the table, and only 1 or 2 sporadic flesh flowers could be seen in the large green chilies. She was unceremonious, picked up the chopsticks on the table, picked out all the only pieces of meat in the peppers, and went to the back kitchen by the way, found some good cabbages on the stove, and fed them to Moo little scalper. Eat fast, there are still many places waiting for us to be lucky. The scalper named Lao Tzu, Moo. After being lucky enough to complete several households, Pu touched her bulging belly and hiccuped contentedly. Lao Tzu's belly is much larger than her. After eating more than a dozen cabbage radishes, he is still not full, pouting his hooves and screaming. Pu patted it on the head, "Don't worry, I'll find you something to eat." This scalper who could understand was her benefactor. Lao Tzu was born shortly after the death of her lunatic mother. She was born out of the ordinary. She did not eat the grass and leaves, she did not drink the water in the fields and the ditch. Pu had to go to the vegetable garden to steal the cabbage. After washing it well, it was willing to condescend and open its mouth, picking up a few good colors and good shapes, and chewing them. Otherwise, he kept yelling and screaming, making half of the village unable to sleep. After half a year, Pu was beaten and his leg was broken, and he was about to be sold. The scalper ran away from Yankin with her on her back. She ran for thousands of miles in succession. When she encountered mud and black water, she drank and ate hay and rotted vegetables. She ran to the foot of the lonely mountain. She was rescued, but Lao Tzu he died, and ascended to heaven ever since. After coming back to life, Pu looked at this delicate cow, only to think it was very cute. She took the cow to a big family house and let it wait in the courtyard. She touched the back kitchen with 2 Chinese cabbage in her arms. When she was about to leave, she suddenly heard the woman sobbing and sobbing. The cries were intermittent and heartwarming, echoing in the gloomy empty house, looking terrifying. Pu's footsteps were still not slow, as if she hadn't heard a whimper. She moved a clean basin, piled the cabbage in it, and then sat down on a small bench and watched the scalper eat. You, help me, help me. The voice became clearer and clearer, and Pu ignored it. After I finished eating, he patted it on the head and signaled it to run back to the cowshed, but walked towards the southeast ancestral hall alone. Walking near the ancestral hall, Pu found something was wrong. The red mist is like flowing blood, surrounding this small village. Yankin is like an isolated island in a sea of blood, and will soon be submerged by huge waves. After listening carefully, there was the sound of ghost crying and wolf howling in the red mist, and I don't know what demons were hidden in it. It's no wonder that the blazing feathers they sent out didn't work, and they encountered blood fog. Pu smiled in her heart, squeezed into the crowd, and quietly watched the excitement. Village chief, Qiling doesn't work, do you think we want to explore in the blood mist? Everyone looked at a middle-aged man respectfully. The man in a silk shirt and long gown, with shiny hair draped behind him, holding a small round mirror tightly in his hand, looking a bit nondescript. The village head's face was solemn and did not speak. "Isn't the fairy door willing to save us?" Whispers sounded from the corner, and the villagers began to talk about it. "Is immortals like them care about our life and death? What the is this, why would they find us?" Pu mingled among the crowd and said softly, "Will Shen Grenzwang not come to save us?" Her voice was not prominent in the noise, only the words of Shen Grenzwang were bit harder, so that people could hear them. "But I don't know who said it." One after another, someone echoed and said, "Yes, isn't the Han girl chosen by the sage elder Zhuang? Isn't he coming to save us?" "Hey, I think he has forgotten about it a long time ago, but he's just a country girl, and those saints don't care about it. What's the use of pretending to be arrogant on weekdays?" The girl next to the village chief was pale, her lips trembled slightly, and she explained in a low voice, "It's not like this, it's not like this, Master must have not seen, Daddy, please help me to tell." She pulled with the village chief's sleeves, his face was full of panic. If Pu saw Suhan's helpless appearance in the past, she would definitely feel distressed, step forward and comfort her softly, and then punish those who uttered bad words one by one. But now she just stood in the crowd, arched slightly, covered her lips with her hand, and smiled with a pair of phoenix eyes. She has always been like this, she will repay her. She turned her face ruthlessly, draped in a human skin, and grew like a wolf. In the previous life, she spent 7 or 79 days, peeling the skin and bones of Sui Han, and grind her soul into pieces, leaving her soul scattered in the extreme pain. In this life, she looked at the weak girl not far away, and suddenly thought of a more interesting way to play. When the discussion became more and more unpleasant, the village head finally couldn't help it, and yelled, "Shut up!" He glanced at the small mirror and said in a deep voice, "It's not that the immortal gate is unwilling to help. The blood mist is too weird, and Qi Ling couldn't send the letter." Then, "Yang Ba, Song Wu, take Qi Ling and go to the blood mist. Take a look inside." The two men who were named murmured unwillingly, "It's so dangerous in the blood mist. You just think we are people of foreign surnames, and you assign us to die." As soon as the voice fell, a few years-old family members pointed at them and shouted, "What are you talking about? People with foreign surnames have long been dissatisfied with the village chief's name of the Immortal Gate. They have never been involved in farming and demanded worship. They also hated the of the New Year's family and arbitrarily dictate major events in the village. They have been resentful for a long time." At the punch, the two groups of people are holding farm tools against each other, and the conflict is on the verge of breaking out. At this moment, "I don't know who said lightly, you cuckold bastards, our women are all slept by us. What kind of face and Sujia call?" The person with the surname immediately reddened his eyes, raised his fist and swiped it, cursing, "You are the bastard. The grandson of the turtle." We can't blame them for overreacting, this incident touched a secret in the village. Yankan is poor and remote, with many vulgar customs, especially patriarchy. Most of the newborn girls who did not eat their first breast milk would be secretly disposed of. After a few decades, there were fewer and fewer women in the village and more bachelors. At this time, the Sui family had a bad idea, and they didn't know what method they used to get women from outside, and then sold them to the old bachelors in the village. These women were young when they arrived in the village, and they were sold early to become child brides-in-laws. They were originally Fang's Hillian who didn't know anything, and separated from their hometown by thousands of mountains and rivers. They would never return to the new year after being trapped in this place. Later, they would die in depression, or after giving birth to a child, they gradually forgot the old things and merged into it. As a seller of goods, Sujia will take possession of a good-looking girl first. The people in the village knew it well, but they had no choice but to silently put a green hat on themselves and recognized the matter. But it is impossible to say that you don't bear the hate. During the fight, several people huddled on the ground and wailed, their heads battered, and the dust rose up, shouting loudly, and the scene was extremely chaotic. No one noticed the girl standing in the dark corner. But if someone comes closer and takes a closer look, they will find that her shoulders are trembling, but it is not because of fear, and her slightly drooping face is smiling with crooked eyebrows. The village chief was so busy that he instructed several people to persuade him, and suddenly a stone flew out of nowhere, slamming his forehead with blood. He was painful and angry, and the little mirror in his hand glowed brightly, as bright as the day, and the villagers covered their eyes one after another, and they couldn't care about fighting anymore. Look at you! What kind of style? The village chief tore off a piece of silk cloth from his sleeve and wrapped it on his head to stop the bleeding. Then he stood with his head high, eagle eyes like a hook, and coldly swept the villagers. His aura is really good, but his head is wrapped in a thick layer of cloth, and people immediately become comical. Several young people lowered their heads and laughed. The village head was anxious and looked around, trying to find out who threw the stone, but the situation was chaotic at the time. Where can he distinguish clearly? Daddy, it's her! Sui Han quietly tugged at the village chief's sleeve, pointing to a remote corner. There was a little girl squatting there, looking at the appearance of 7 or 8 years old, dirty, not half of her body, skinny to the point of protruding bones, which was very eye-catching. The girl lowered her head, picked up a few stones in her hand, and was playing seriously. The village chief's eyes flickered, and suddenly he had an idea. He walked slowly, and the crowd consciously followed and surrounded the little girls. "Silly girl, can you help uncle a favor?" The village head bent down, barely trying to squeeze a kindly smile or two, but just after smiling, he pulled the wound on his face, and he grinned with pain. Silly girl raised her head, her eyes were black and white, and terribly clear. The village chief took a deep breath and couldn't help taking a few steps back. This look made him feel like he was being stared at by a beast. The sky is gloomy, and the village chief is such an adult. Others can't see the girl's appearance. They just yelled, "Silly girl, help us to see in the red mist, come back and give you bones to eat." Piyu lowered her head slightly, pretending to be ordinary and timid, her shoulders trembling, and Nyonyo said, "Ghosts, fear." The village chief breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was dazzling just now, and coaxed in a good voice, "Where is the ghost? Come, you take this." He forced the blazing feather into the girl's hand, "Hold this and walk in. Look at the fog." He didn't think that the little girl could walk through the bleeding fog alone, but she could explore the way for people. He could also see the dangers in the blood fog from the flower viewing realm, so he had to prepare a lot. Piyu's cub-like eyes were full of tears, her little hand gripped the warm lingyu, and she wanted to cry, "I'm cold. Little bastard, why are you doing so much?" A villager quickly cursed. Piyu lowered his eyes and glanced at him quickly. This person's name is Sunung, the cousin of the village chief, and the house where the woman was crying just now is also his home. "What are you talking about? Go and buy yourself with so many tongues." The village chief was upset, scolded him a few words, then took out a red jade from his sleeve, and said warmly, "It won't be cold with this." He made up his mind that if the child died in the blood mist, Jade would retrieve it in the future. It was a matter of life and death. It didn't make sense to care about this kind of thing, not to mention that Jade Pei didn't belong to him. The jade pendant has dark eyes. This jade pendant carved into the shape of a red carp was once worn by Sui Han. She took jade, and a trace of warmth spread from her hand, dispelling the chill from her body, which was a good thing. So she wiped away the tears on her face and responded aggrievedly, with a reluctant face, and slowly moved into the blood mist. The village head opened the flower viewing border, but found that there was nothing red on it, and people suddenly panicked. Qiling and the flower viewing realm interacted with each other, and he could see the situation near Qiling in the blood mist from the mirror, but in this situation, could it be that the girl was swallowed as soon as she entered the blood mist? But at this time, someone still has to bother him. "Daddy," Sui Han said timidly, "that piece of jade was given to me." The village head was not angry, and raised his hand as a slap and slapped him. Where is your master now? It doesn't matter if it is important, I should have buried you in the back mountain. Sui Han clutched his red and swollen face, tears fell from his eyes. The blood mist looked like a ghost with a wide open mouth, and soon swallowed the girl's small figure. The villager breathed a sigh of relief, but immediately became anxious again. Can this go out? Maybe it can? She's like her mother, she has a hard life. After Peo walked into the blood mist, the cowardly color on her face vanished in no time. She raised her hand, and the blood mist licked the back of her hand as if she saw her relatives. She was called a blood demon back then because of the blood mist wherever she went. This fog of death, ignorance, and death was originally born because of her soaring resentment. This time Yankin was surrounded by blood mist, and I think it was influenced by her rebirth. Pu introduced blood into the body, and a vermilion mark appeared on the center of his forehead, like a scorching peach petal. It's just that the color of this peach blossom is still light now, and it looks a little languid. Still not strong enough. The blood mist itself does not have much lethality, but there are many corpses hidden in it, and it will continue to attract demons and monsters here. After all, resentment is their best nourishment. In order not to add to the trouble, the fog needs to disperse earlier. She sighed slightly in her heart, and walked deeper into the blood mist with her hands. There is still a year to go before Gushin's introductory trial. She has so many things to do and there is always no time. It's not that you can kill Suhan once and for all. There are countless people who covet the sacred beasts. The only thing she can do is to make herself strong enough to be as strong as in the previous life. Law, swinging sleeves attracts Huang Chuan. Even if the sky is going to destroy Gushin, she can fight against the sky with her own strength to protect the Gushin and her master. Pu can perceive the situation in the blood mist, and avoid the corpse puppets in advance. After a quarter of an hour, she finally walked near the entrance of the village, which is also the eye of Yankin Feng Shui. She dropped the flaming feathers casually, put the index finger of her right hand in her mouth, bit down hard, and blood flowed. Before the blood had clotted, she knelt down and drew a blood talisman on the ground. This symbol is called Yinghui. As the name suggests, it can attract ghosts, corpses, and puppets. Painted here, not only can break the feng shui of Yan village, but also make the villagers have no peaceful days for a long time. There are many strokes of the ghost charm, and Pu bit all 5 fingers before it can be drawn. Just when it was almost the last stroke, Qiling was suddenly blown away by the yin wind. She didn't care, waved her hand and dropped the bright red, and then sat on the ground extremely tired, panting quietly. At this moment, she was just a child after all, with a weak body and no self-cultivation to protect her body. Drawing such a middle-level talisman seal was still a little reluctant. Hey? Whose blazing feather is this? Someone asked softly in the mist. The voice was very pleasant, soft, and moving, as if a gust of breeze was blowing slowly, passing the bead on the ice tray, and Pei Yumingluan. Pu straightened up abruptly, her eyes widened in disbelief, and looked back. In the blood mist, a person walked slowly. Kuiyu is graceful, smiling eyes slightly raised, born with a smiling face, a natural romantic moment. She curled up her sleeves and looked over with her smiling eyes, and it was like spring flowers blooming, and the blue waves were full of smoke, which made people remember what ghosts and charms were obsessed, and could only wish to drown in this spring. Pu couldn't help holding his breath, his mind went blank. She was wary in her heart, no matter who came, the blood mist would stop and remind, except for one person. Master! She silently called with straight eyes and trembling lips. In this world, she only had no defense against Huebo. Which child are you from? How come you are here? Huebo noticed her bloodied right hand, frowning her eyebrows, and then suddenly said, You are such a small child, in order to send Qiling, you dare to be alone. Run into the blood mist. She took the child's hand and carefully wrapped it with shampoo. Is it hurt by a corpse? Does it hurt? The woman's hands are slender and soft, white jade is flawless, like a godlike creation, carefully crafted. She uses such a pair of beautiful jade-like hands to wrap the child's thin, dirty, scarred, withered claws like chicken feet. Wipe off the dirt and blood on it. There is no trace of dislike or impatience on the face, and the movements are careful and gentle, like wiping the world's treasure. Peiu's eyes were red, and she whispered, "It hurts." Huibo held her hand, sighed gently, looked up at her, and smiled, "I'll blow it to you, so it won't hurt." Her gaze caught the bright red pattern on the ground, with a trace of doubt in her eyes. Ying Ghost Talisman. Could it be that this blood fog is a man-made disaster? Huibai muttered to himself, took out a talisman from his sleeve and covered it. The spell ignited instantly, sparks burst like fireflies, and within a short time, the blood curse on the ground disappeared without a trace, leaving only ashes and sporadic flames. "Don't be afraid," Huibo said slowly, holding the child's hand. "I don't know who painted the ghost charm here, and wants to summon evil spirits, bad guys, and feng shui. I have broken it by casting a spell." Peiyu had mixed feelings in her heart, silently looking at a place of Heijin, unable to say anything. "Did you enter the blood mist alone? Where are your family members? How can you let you run out alone to spread the blazing feathers? The blood mist is so dangerous, you are so young." "I have no family." Peiyu lowered her eyebrows, without any expression on her face. Huibo was stunned for a moment, with some regrets in his eyes. "I'm sorry, I mentioned your sadness, but since it wasn't for your family, why did you run into the blood mist alone? Who is it for with Qi-Ling on your body?" "Signaling. The village is surrounded. They asked me to come out and spread the letter." Peiyu stood upright, with a calm expression and no resentment, as if everything should be like this, naturally. "You mean," Huibo asked incredulously, "you actually broke into the blood mist for a group of unrelated people?" Her eyes flickered, seemingly surprised and moved. "Good boy," she asked Peiyu's hand softly, "what's your name?" The child in front of him pursed his lips, his black eyes looked at her unblinking, his lips moved, "Peiyu." Huibo was so horrified that he let go of his hand and backed away several steps, staring at the child in surprise. After watching for a long time, he sighed in sorrow, "It is indeed the Virgin of the world, so terrible. Terrible. The author has something to say, Peiyu, I'm really not a good person. P.S. This time the protagonist is different from Qing Ping. It belongs to the type of people who don't offend me and I don't offend people. If people commit crimes, I hope you like it." The name Peiyu is really familiar to Huibo. Today's Huibo is actually a book wearer. When she was young and ignorant, she once wrote a newspaper article on Green JJ, whose name was also very straightforward, called "This is a Newspaper Article." The article is about a girl from a mountain village who was taken by the fairy, step by step on the path of immortality, and finally established a sect and became the first person in the immortal world. If it's just like this is just a cool article, but there is a second female in the book. She has a beautiful appearance, a pure heart, and a superb cultivation base. She and the heroine are childhood sweethearts, treating the heroine with one heart and one mind. In short, she grabs the heroine's light and holds the heroine's script. If it is purely like this is just a cool article without distinction between primary and secondary, but the heroine is a black heart lotus. She seized the chance of the second woman, destroyed her sect, and pushed her into the bottom of the 10,000 demon caverns, making her struggle in endless pain and will never be relieved. The readers were dumbfounded, the readers were shocked, the readers were angry. What did Goddess Wulai do wrong? You want to write her so miserably? I want to see G, you feed me shit? As a result, all the comments in the comment section were all negative points. It was obvious that this was just a short essay of less than 100,000 words, and the long comments that insulted her righteously added up to be longer than the essay. Later, the newspaper article was posted on the forum, and Huibo was named the annual she-mother and was rated as a shit-feeding ability shocking the ancients and the present. But Huibo had a very good mentality, and he said indifferently, "I said that this is a newspaper article, you have to read it, and blame me." Reader, so angry. Maybe it's because people are too arrogant and struck by thunder, and the comment area of "this is a newspaper and social article" suddenly has small green characters. Hehe, if it's so big, let's go into the book and be cannon fodder. Huibo didn't take it seriously, but when she woke up, she actually wore the article in this newspaper, and became the cannon fodder of the Virgin Mary's second master, who died in the catastrophe. After discovering this tragic fact, Huibo stood withered on the edge of the mountain for a night. The peaks of the solitary mountain are steep and straight, like a sword piercing the sky, piercing the clouds, and there is a tendency to ask the sky. Very high, easy to jump. With the icy mountain breeze, Huibo looked down at his feet. The cliff was bottomless, clouds and mists, and a vast expanse of whiteness. At this moment, the sunrise is born, the sea of clouds is gilded, and the red sun slowly rises. The world is silent and quiet, and everything is beautiful. Huibo was deeply shocked, and was shrunk by the wind, and felt that he could be rescued again. Now, Huibo looked at the thin and weak child in front of him, that is, the second female who will lead wolves into the house in the future, with unspeakable complexity. If she was the girl who just wore on a few hundred years ago, she would definitely step forward and hug Pu and cry, "Cub, Grandma, I'm sorry." But as a calm monk who lived several hundred years old and could be the ancestor of the girl's ancestor, she just sighed up to the sky and said in a daze, as expected of the Virgin on earth, "It is so terrible. Terrible." At a young age, in order to save the lives of the people in the village, he ran alone into the blood mist, which really combined the words in the original book, "The heart is pure and good, and the white jade is flawless." It would be a pity for such a good child to be destroyed like in the original book. Pu didn't understand Huibo's thoughts of turning back and forth. She just stared blankly at her hand being thrown away, her eyes slowly turning red. Master never shakes her hand away. She sniffed and hung her head, covering the sparkling water in her eyes. "Good boy." Huibo paused for a moment, and said softly, "You are just a 7 or 8-year-old child. Why do you run into the blood fog alone for the lives of others? I didn't ask you to give up kindness, but blood fog and danger. It's unpredictable. If an adult comes in and you will die in 9 years, at your age, there will be 10 deaths and no life. Therefore, even if it is sacrifice, adults should do it. Don't be so stupid in the future, okay?" Pu was still immersed in the sad emotion of Master throwing away his hand, and nodded absent-mindedly. Upon seeing this, Huibo sighed, knowing that educating people is not done overnight, and children will not change their xingxing after hearing her words. But she didn't intend to give up this ill-fated child, so she raised her hand to touch the child's head. "By the way, are you willing to be my apprentice?" The child suddenly raised his head, the water flickered in his eyes, and the chick nodded like a peck. Huibo smiled and said, "Good apprentice, come, take me to your village first." When the two were about to move forward, there was a sound of rapid footsteps in the fog, and the jade frowned, and the appearance of the visitor was already clear in his heart, a young man about 18 years old, wearing a large green robes, a flowing jade belt, and a ghost mask on his waist. Long sleeves are romantic. People have good looks, but their long eyebrows are slightly lowered, and there is always a sense of frowning. The cultivation base is complete, but the foundation is completed. She was about to send the blood mist to fascinate the teenager for a while, when Huibo looked over with excitement suddenly and waved, "Jane Yi, I am here." Pu's brows furrowed deeper. What is the relationship between this person and Master? The young man walked over with the sound, and when he saw Huibo, his eyebrows curled into a horoscope, and he asked bitterly, "Master, why did you run in alone? Master? Peyu's eyes dimmed, and the murderous intent flashed in her eyes. She lowered her head subconsciously to cover the subtle expression changes on her face. Did the master accept other apprentices? It's no wonder that he would throw away his hand. In his previous life, Huibo only accepted one of her apprentices. At that time, she was a 3 spiritual root, and her aptitude was neither good nor bad. Standing on the dojo and entangled in which peak to enter, the smiling woman in Xingyi tricked her into the door with just one sentence. She said, "Be my apprentice. From now on, I will only accept you as an apprentice." Later, Pu learned that Huibo didn't accept disciples because of her lack of spiritual energy. Peak Master Huibo has a shallow cultivation base. Those who can pass the trial to reach the 6 peaks are all talented, and no one wants to be her apprentice, accompany her in the cold. Except for Pu. Haha, didn't I get a little excited when I saw the blood mist? Huibo laughed a few times and pointed to the child and introduced, "Come on, this is your future younger sister named Pu. Pu, this is your future big brother, Zhao Jianyi." Pu squeezed the corners of her clothes tightly. Master actually accepted other apprentices, liars, liars. But it doesn't matter, those people, just kill them all. Master is hers alone. Zhao Jianyi nodded helplessly. He seemed to be very used to the behavior of picking up apprentices on the roadside by Huibo. He waved and smiled at the child, "Hello, junior sister. When we first met, the brother didn't bring anything, so let me give this to you first." As he said, he took off the ghost mask on his waist and handed it to the girl. The mask was carved into the shape of an evil spirit and sprayed with red paint. The eyes are like red lights, and the mouth of the blood basin can be filled with a fist, revealing the pointed fangs, which looks terrifying. Generally, children will cry when they see this thing, and have nightmares for several days. So it can be seen that this big brother is not a normal person. Pu took the mask, slightly surprised. The ghost mask is a magic weapon that can change the appearance of a person and block the detection of spiritual consciousness. The effect is related to the cultivation of the producer. This gadget may seem simple, but it is not easy to make. She had only seen it once in her previous life, hanging around the waist of the Momin sect master, who was hailed as a rare refining wizard in 1,000 years. "You're all right to play with it, hee." Zhao Jian smiled as he touched the back of his head, looking very upright. "I used to use this to scare the younger sisters to play." Pu's eyes turned black when she heard the words, her teeth clenched. "Junior sister? They? How many apprentices does Huibo accept?" Huibo helped her forehead. "You still have the face to show off these things? I'll explain it first. Pu and Bayer are different. She is a good boy. If you dare to bully her, you can wait for me." She didn't know that the good boy she thought was crushing a silver tooth at this moment, swallowing blood in his throat, and thinking bitterly, "Bayer? It's so intimate. Just kill them all, regardless of the master. Just kill as many apprentices as you have received." Zhao Jianyi looked at the child lovingly, smiled and nodded, I know, I was ignorant back then." He caught a glimpse of the flaming ling in Huibo's hand, and he was immediately overjoyed. "Master, the flaming ling you received? Was it from the person trapped in the blood mist? Then we should quickly solve this ghost and get paid. The monks are not free to solve disasters for mortals. When the mortal emits a blazing feather and the monk accepts the blazing feather, it means that a deal is concluded where I will help you solve the ghost and you will reward me." Powers above the golden core naturally don't care about this small amount of money, but most monks can't form golden cores in their entire lives. For those monks who are lagging behind in Qi training, the rewards given by mortals are undoubtedly very important. They also want to eat. Zhao Jianyi snatched Qi Ling from Huibo's hand and held it in his hand as if he was a darling, with a smirk on his face. Quick, let's make money." Pu didn't understand his excitement. Even if you make hundreds of commissions, the reward is not worth a ghost mask. But she still leads the way, with a very well-behaved appearance. The child was skinny, his clothes worn and ragged, and his back looked very pitiful. Zhao Jianyi pressed Qi to his heart, and sighed softly, "Junior sister is too skinny, I don't know how much I have suffered." Huibo nodded in agreement, "Poor. It's not the life of the protagonist to grow the heart of the deputy sage." Pu walked in the forefront. No one knew that her eyes were scarlet at the moment and her face was fierce. How could it be said that she was pitiful? This appearance was nothing more than the evil spirit hanging from her waist. The master will actually accept apprentices again, and he also accepts so many. Liar, liar. Obviously, she is the only one. Her mouth was full of blood, and her heart was as fierce as fire, and her skull was completely blank. All the painful struggles in the previous life and all the plans in this life are just to protect one person. But that person actually dared to accept others as apprentices. Her heart was so jealous that she had long thought about how to get rid of this group of brothers and sisters without knowing it. Perhaps she was too engrossed, her steps couldn't help slowing down slowly, moving from in front of her to Zhao Jian's side. Suddenly the fishy wind blew, Huibo's complexion changed slightly, and the charms in his sleeve came out, and a corpse puppet who wanted to sneak attack screamed and fell down beside Pu. Only then did Pu come back to his senses, and secretly scolded herself for being so careless, even if the corpse puppet approached him. As soon as she raised her head, she met two pairs of twinkling star-like eyes. Zhao Jian wiped the corners of his eyes with tears, and said with emotion, "Junior sister, did you just want to block the corpse puppet for me? It doesn't have to be this way. Although the brother is useless, I don't need you to protect it anyway." "Huibo, apprentice, you are such a good person." "Zhao Jianyi, junior sister, you are such a good person." Pu. She looked down at the fallen corpse puppet. The corpse puppet's facial features were festering, and his head like a withered grass draped behind him, which was terrifying. She recognized the rotting corpse. This corpse was named Huaniang when she was born, and she was able to embroider good flowers. She is Sunung's wife kidnapped from another place, and she has been here for many years. Huaniang is always smiling, she is a bit rich, she used to secretly bring Pu and her mother to eat, sometimes it is a bowl of porridge, sometimes it is a few buns. For Xiao Pu, who competes with wild dogs for food every day, this smiling fat lady is just as good as a fairy. But Huaniang died more than a month ago. After Suinong was drunk, she used to hit her with a stick, and her screams rang everywhere, making the whole village heard. Her son walked slowly through the door and waved to the group of people who pricked their ears to listen to the excitement of good things. It's okay, she can't die, her life is very cheap." The violence that day was exceptionally long, from midday to sunset. Huaniang's crying and wailing became lower and lower, and finally turned into a weak moan. Pu rushed into the yard to stop, but was kicked out by Huaniang's son. No one dared to step forward, except for the old yellow dog who had fed the leftovers several times by Huaniang. The old dog bit on Suinong's leg tightly, but it was so old that he lost all his teeth, and Suinong smashed it on the head with a stick and died. Huaniang is also dead. No funeral. That day, Suinong's family cooked a pot of dog meat. Smell fragrant. In the usual days when people boiled meat, Pu would always squat at the door of that household, waiting for a few leftover bones. But even if those people feed the bones to pigs and dogs, they refuse to leave it to her. So most of the time, she just went to smell it. Smelling the fragrant, chewing twice with his mouth, as if he had eaten meat. But Pu did not go that day. She ran to the mass grave at Hushan, trying to dig a grave for Huaniang. She didn't have a hammer, so she could only dig with her bare hands. She digged until her hands were dripping with blood before she made a small pit. But she was too weak, Huaniang was also dead, so that she couldn't push her body into the pit because of the strength of milking. The sky has darkened, the mass graves are like fireflies, and the tombs are piled up one after the other. I don't know what kind of insects they are starting to whine, a bit like many people are crying. Huaniang was lying on the ground with a big wound on her forehead, her face was covered with blood, and she looked terrifying. The 7 or 8-year-old child was very tired after doing so many things, so he fell asleep leaning on Huaniang's thigh wherever he could be scared. When she woke up the next day, she found herself sleeping in a bullpen. 2 pieces of cloth were wrapped around the injured hand. The 4 corners of the coarse cloth were embroidered with small flowers, which was Huaniang's favorite pattern during her lifetime. It rained at night, the mud in the mass grave was wet, Huaniang lay in the mud with her hands folded, her blood on her face was washed away by the rain, her brows were serene, her lips raised, she seemed to be smiling. The child stood in front of the pit blankly, not understanding why Huaniang fell asleep by herself. She stood there for a while, until her belly groaned several times, then she bent over and took the soil to cover Huaniang's body. By the way, she put the 2 pieces of cloth, or handkerchiefs, in Huaniang's hands. Huaniang was already dead, the corpse puppet under her feet was just a corpse aroused by blood mist resentment. She didn't have any consciousness and would only kill. She would never squint and laugh, and could no longer embroider with needles. People die as a lamp goes out, like soup pak. In just a moment of effort, the old things of Jianchen were brought up in Peiu's mind. She was neither sad nor melancholy. If she had to describe it, it would be numb. She was about to look away, but was covered by someone. Don't look, Huibo's palm is soft and his voice is soft, don't be afraid. Peiu froze for a moment, blinking her eyes, and burst into tears. Huibo bent down, half-wrapped the girl, covered her eyes with the other hand, and comforted her softly, don't be afraid, it's just a dead person, there's nothing to be afraid of. Jane, why don't you know how to block it with your body, let your junior sister saw such a sight. Zhao Jian curled her mouth, her eyebrows drooped more severely, and she looked more worried, this blood fog is too weird, I didn't notice the corpse puppet approaching. I blamed me, Yingzi was so scared to sleep for several nights the first time he saw the corpse puppet. I feel that the little junior sister is afraid, alas, I had already brought Zhou Gonggai when I knew I was going out this time. Huibo sighed, forget it, don't blame you or you. Blame me for not discovering it earlier, blame me, and blame me. They are all anxious to take mistakes on themselves, and between words, they are more like peers than mentors and apprentices. Zhao Jianyi sighed again, this blood mist seems to be conscious, and I don't know what it is. Huibo led Peiu, and Zhao Jian followed at the end, walking along the village road together. This time they didn't need to lead the way with Peiu, instead they carefully guarded her one after the other. Suddenly, Huibo stopped and said softly, someone is coming. Because of the blood mist induction, Peiu's mind clearly showed the familiar figure of the 3 people who walked around Yang Bia and Songwu were pale, looking around vigilantly, but Suneng was reluctant to walk in the middle. They were lucky, and they were able to get here unscathed. After a few breaths, Zhao Jianyi also heard footsteps. The 3 of them didn't know anyone was standing quietly in the blood mist waiting for themselves. Suddenly, they ran into 3 black shadows in front of them. They were so scared that they yelled and pissed. Sui Nong fell on the ground with her legs soft. Zhao Jian frowned, Bittergourd's face dragged longer, don't call it, it will be troublesome to call another corpse puppet. After a short period of time, the 3 of Yankan calmed down. When they met Peiu, who was calm, they felt embarrassed. Suneng opened his mouth and shouted, little bastard, you're not dead. It seems that the village chief thought he was dead, so he sent someone out again, and Suneng also walked into the blood mist, which meant that he had compromised with the foreign surname. Peiu didn't care about the name, but the other 2 were already dissatisfied. Huibo's brows frowned slightly, and he held the girl's hand tighter. Zhao Jianyi directly replied louder, "What do you call my junior sister?" "Ah, Immortal Chong." Yang Ba saw Zhao Jian's chest blazing, and immediately fell to his knees, begging, "Xian Chong, help us." Song Wu also followed and fell to the ground, begging. Zhao Jianyi pointed to Suneng and asked, "You, that's you, what did you call my junior sister just now?" Sui Nong glanced at the expressionless Pu, and then at the angry young Immortal Chong. He shook his fat head and big ears, and said with a shy smile, "Isn Chong, I don't know which one belongs to you." "Junior sister." The corners of Pu's lips gradually evoked a very light range. The screaming of these people has attracted the corpse puppet, and the corpse of the flower lady not far away. Maybe Huaniang's obsession was not cleared before she died, and her resentment was too deep. When Sui Nong's voice sounded, she was suppressed by the spell and stood up swayingly and walked here. The year-old seemed to see something, his eyes widened, staring straight ahead without blinking, his face pale as paper, and his legs could not help shaking. The dark color on the crotch trousers fainted, dripping water sounded. Huaniang. Zhao Jianyi pinched his nose, "It smells so bad." Huibo put the shampoo in front of the child's nose, and nodded in agreement, "It's not just urine, but the whole body smells bad." Suneng had been frightened by the horrified Huaniang who was falling down by the carrion. But the two immortals generally stood not far away watching the show, and they didn't mean to save people at all. Zhao Jianyi stroked his palms and laughed, "Ha ha 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 ha." Huaniang tilted her rotten flesh and bones head, swaying towards the year-old. Her eyes were muddy and dark, pus flowing from the 7 orifices, and her 5 fingers had long black fingernails, and her mouth screamed, making her actions much quicker than before. It seems that it has evolved into a walking corpse. Zhao Jian touched his chin with one hand and said in deep thought, "The walking corpse was born out of resentment. Does this person have any relationship with this corpse?" Huibo nodded in agreement, "Exactly." Zhao Jian said strangely, "Master, what do you see?" Huibo's eyes narrowed slightly, and he slowly said, "When I look at this person, I know that he dares to do everything except good things." Suneng was so scared that his 3 souls came out of his body, Chi Pai separated from his body, and sat down on the ground. When he heard the voice of Huibo, he seemed to see hope, crawling over on all fours, and crying, "Xiang Long, save me, this lady is going to kill me." Huibo hugged Pu and backed away several steps, avoiding the dusty fat hands. Zhao Jianyi also closed his eyes, and his voice sounded very sincere, "A gentleman is also a beast, he sees his life, and can't bear to see his death, you just go away." At this moment, Huaniang was standing in front of Sui Nong. Sui Nong crawled back shivering while looking at Huaniang's rotten and pus-like face. Huaniang jumped up like a monkey and rushed on him, opening her mouth to bite on his neck. A scent of corpses hit his face, and when I was too old to feel sick, I saw the deep black sharp teeth like a row of sharp blades, brushing with cold light, and cutting over to myself. He hurriedly stretched out his hand to stop Huaniang's mouth. His arms were so heavy, the thick and disgusting dark green liquid fell on his face drop by drop. Yang Ba and Song Wu were so scared that their faces were like golden paper. Seeing that Huaniang was only moving towards Sui, they secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then they dared to secretly raise their eyes and look at the 2 immortals who were standing by. The young man's eyebrows are fine, his thin lips are slightly raised, and his face is thin and cool in capitals. The other woman with Qiu and Tsingyi has a pair of apricot eyes and a beautiful nose. She has a fair complexion and a gentle smile. She looks like an immortal, which is very amiable. But they shrank their necks and moved a little to the young man's side. Facing the terrible sight of a corpse biting a person, she could still laugh so happily, "This woman is really terrible." Sui Han was exhausted, and his arm was continuously pressed down by the corpse. He didn't dare to let go, only crying and begging, Xian Chong, please help me, I am the cousin of the village chief, I can give you a lot of money. There are women. I can give you anything. When he heard the money, Zhao Jianyi immediately opened his eyes. Oh! How much do you give? Huibo quipped, apprentice, you really have an eye for money. Year-old hurriedly shouted, 12 taels of gold, no, 100 taels. 100 taels. Please. His arms were sore and painful, and his eyes were squeezed down, watching the Huanyang about to bite herself. No money is not enough. Ha ha ha, it's done. Zhao Jian took out a talisman and patted it behind Huanyang. The body froze immediately and fell straight forward. Sui Nong was weak in his hands, and he spoke to the corpse, face to face. The rancid pus flowed into his mouth, which felt really, very sour. Sui Nong rolled his eyes and fainted immediately. You drag him and lead the way. Zhao Jian said a little bit by Yang Ba Song Wu. Yes, yes. These two dare not listen, but Huanyang's appearance is really terrifying and tight. They approached with shaking legs, closed their eyes and gritted their teeth, and pulled Sui from under the body with old strength. They were working panting over there, while Zhao Jianyi and Huibo surrounded Peiyu with concern. Huibo covered Peiyu's eyes and whispered, apprentices, don't be afraid, they are just to go for. Did you hear that? They are all using a lot of force. The eldest brother on the left, please come on. Yang Ba, who was standing on the left, was so frightened that he staggered and dragged his feet harder. Zhao Jianyi echoed, yes, yes, the two are at a stalemate now, and the battle is very fierce. The big brother on the right, you have to work hard too. After Song Wu heard it, he glanced at Yang Ba, both of them had the same frowning faces, wishing to cry without tears. Damn fat pig, why is it so heavy? They murmured secretly from the bottom of their hearts. Peiyu stood obediently. Even if her eyes were covered, she just needed to move her mind, and Song Wuangba's embarrassed appearance appeared in her mind. She curled her lips, raised her hand and gently touched the back of Huibo's hand. The tentacles have a jade-like texture, which is somewhat similar to a red carp. The child's fingertips are cold. The back of his hand seemed to be licked by a poisonous snake, and Bai's body trembled slightly, and there was a vaguely strange feeling in his heart, as if he was being stared at by some beast. She didn't take this intuition into her heart, but stared at the poor little who was standing upright, a little worried. The child ran into the blood mist at a young age, and he didn't know what he saw or whether he would leave a psychological shadow in the future. Peiyu, Huibo unwrapped the long silk ribbon, draped the big cloak of Qiu on the girl, and covered the girl's eyes with a green satin, then he held her hand and said softly, follow me. The cool breeze blew, Huibai coughed slightly, and Zhao Jian asked nervously, Master, do you feel uncomfortable? Huibo smiled helplessly, how can I be so delicate? Is Master's body bad? Peiyu lowered her head, feeling a little strange in her heart. The master of the previous life was obviously very healthy. There are too many variables in this life. By the way, I just saw the feng shui eye spot here. Someone used blood to draw ghost charms. Huibo whispered, I thought the blood fog was a man-made disaster, but after the spell was used to break the blood charm, the fog became not yet dispersed. Zhao Jianyi was also surprised, what kind of deep hatred is that he used such a shameful method? Two eldest brothers, have any monk in your village have any grudges? Yang Ba thought for a while, and patted his head, it must be that Taoist priest. Song Wu echoed, yes. It must be him. Huibo covered his lips, his eyes crescenting with a smile, Taoist. Could it be that our Suanmen disciple failed? In the realm of comprehension, different schools and schools dress differently when traveling down the mountain. Suanmen disciples are used to dressing up as Taoist priests, while disciple sage Zhuang likes to wear Confucian shirts and pretend to be a gentle scholar. Momin takes saving use as the motto, so after the disciples leave Xiancheng, they often take on jobs that are not ashamed of the world, such as traffickers and pawns, leading cars and selling pulp. Ah! Yang Ba opened his mouth wide, and asked in shock and fear, What, is that person in the same school as you? Zhao Jian curled his lips and said, Who knows? Let me talk about how you settled your grudges first. Yang Ba glanced at Pu, his eyes flickering, and hesitated, No, nothing, but he is a liar, we saw through him, and then. Huibo stopped, smiled, and said, Jane Yi, let's take your junior sister home first. Zhao Jian understood for a moment, yes, it takes place once every 10 years. It would be a pity to delay the time. Songwu and Yang Ba were shocked, Xian Chong, are you not going to save us? Zhao Jianyi frowned and said bitterly, You don't even dare to tell the truth, how can we save each other? Or do not waste each other's time, you should also go back earlier and prepare the coffin for yourself. I said. Songwu hurriedly said, The immortal chief, don't leave us. Then he disregarded Yang Ba's dissuasion and slowly said a disaster 2 months ago. A woman died in Yankan 2 months ago. After her death, she turned into a ghost, killing more than 10 people, causing trouble in the village and everyone in danger. At this time, a Taoist priest came and said that he could get rid of evil spirits, so he opened the altar that night. However, his strength was not enough. After being severely injured by the female ghost, he became angry and turned into anger. He actually blamed the innocent villagers and forced the villagers to pay compensation, and was finally driven out of the village. It must be that he didn't receive the money, so he was instigated to harm us. Songwu said viciously. Oh! Huibei chuckled, So, isn't it my fellow student? Songwu said hurriedly, Dare not, that Taoist is really hateful. But how can you be like him? After hearing such flattery, Huibo lowered his head slightly, with a shy look, I have praised myself, since that's the case, what about the female ghost in the end? Songwu lowered his eyes, and deliberately ignored the child walking in the middle, lowered his voice and said, We have paid a lot of money to invite a little saint from Shengren's-Wang to come and beat her to death. Huibo let out an ah, as if he was frightened by the words Han Fei Po San. It took him a long time to sigh softly and warmly, That's really tragic. Zhao Jian asked, It's a ghost and a walking corpse. What do you do that hurts the world? Songwu quickly denied, Don't get me wrong, immortal chief, we are all good people. Good people don't make any ghosts. Zhao Jian muttered, but thinking of the 100 taels of gold, he didn't say anything. The villagers were eagerly looking forward to the sound of Dada footsteps, seeing Songwu and Yang Ba coming out of the red mist, followed by the grey-headed and mud-faced Sui Nong being dragged. What's the matter? The village chief shouted. At this time, he didn't even care about being afraid of the village chief. Yang Babai gave him a glance and complained, Don't tell me, if we hadn't met the immortal to save each other, we would all be cold now. The village head hurriedly asked, Where is the fairy? There was a chuckle in the red mist. If the breeze is blowing slowly, and the spring rain is floating, the voice is gentle and moving, soothing and melodious, like a fairy's sound. Everyone couldn't help but look over there. The woman walked slowly with the green-eyed child. She has a slim figure, her skin is fat, her eyebrows are smiling, her eyes are drunk, and she walks down from the painting. The villagers' eyes straightened, and after a while, they all bowed to the ground, shouting for help from the immortal. Huibo ignored them, bent over to untie the silk and satin for Pu, and said softly, Okay, I'm back. She held the silk and satin in her hand, and held the child in the other hand, and then glanced at the villagers who were kneeling on the ground. Songwu and Yangba had already experienced the terrifying appearance of this fairy, wanted to tell the villagers, but did not dare to speak, only silently moved his body back a few steps. Huibo recognized the village chief at a glance. Among those in a row of coarse blouses and dusty grey, he was the only one with a long silk shirt, greasy hair, white hands, and no calluses, and he seemed to have never done farm work. She carefully looked at the little girl next to the village chief, and after a long time, smiled lightly at her. "I found you, protagonist." This behavior of Huebo fell in Peu's eyes long ago. The child's eyes were red, his teeth were clenched, and his body trembled slightly. Master actually looks at others, and looks at others with such a look, and that person is actually cold. Isn't she thinking of accepting apprentices again? Peu's heart dripped with anger, and she tried her best to suppress her urge to kill. Affected by it, the blood mist suddenly thickened, as if the wave was constantly surging. The villagers shrank in fright, their knees softened, and they knelt down one after another. But the fairy didn't give them a straight eye, just turned around and looked at the child with concern, and asked gently, "What's the matter?" When Huebo saw the child with tears in his eyes, he couldn't help but respect her in his heart. This group of villagers didn't even say a word of concern, enough to see that they didn't care about the life or death of their children. But the child actually broke through the blood fog for them, and saw that the villagers were saved, and he was so excited that tears came out. Terrible! At this moment, Zhao Jianyi had already negotiated the price with the village chief with Qiling light car. He waved his hand and said to the villagers, "Don't worship, don't worship. Pack all the important things. I will take you to the next village for refuge first. Xian Chong, can't you get rid of the blood mist for us?" Sui Han asked quietly. Many villagers babbled, "Yes, yes, we have paid you, why don't you help us disperse the blood mist?" Zhao Jian frowned, "Where is so much nonsense?" Sui Han walked out, made a deep thought at him, and slowly said, "This fairy, first, it is our unshirkable responsibility to kill demons and demons. If you don't remove the blood fog, we people will be homeless. The second is to collect money and do things for others. According to morals, since you have collected our money, you should settle this matter for us." Zhao Jian gave her a blank look, and said with no anger, "Just the little money you gave me to get rid of the blood fog? Do you think this blood fog is unusual? The blood fog surrounded the river city 300 years ago, how many golden core monks fold it inside? If you have the skills, you can find a monk Yuan Ying to come over." Peu was slightly shocked, did the blood mist pass through 300 years ago? "Jane Yi, don't say anything." Huebo stepped forward slowly, looking at Sui Han with a smile, "Little girl, you make a lot of sense. Worthy of being the protagonist, the king of mouths, and invincible." Sui Han was overjoyed and said modestly, "Xian Chong, you." Huebo raised his hand, stopped what she was about to say, and asked in a gentle voice, "You just boasted of me, are you also from the immortal door?" Sui Han raised his lips, his face was quite self-satisfied, "I have been regarded as a disciple by the sage elder Zhuang Zhangli. I only need to pass the trial and I can directly worship him. What is master going to do?" Peu was puzzled. Since Sui Han said that he had a teacher, master couldn't directly grab his apprentice from sage Zhuang. "Elder Zhangli," Huebo nodded with a smile, "who is that?" The smile on Suhan's face froze. Of course Huebo knew who Zhangli was. Sage elder Zhuang Liao, Sui Han's first thigh. The disciple of Shen Grenzhuang has always been proud, Huebo sighed, knowing that it cannot be done, and doing it, although thousands of people are going to go, what a sacrifice of self and selfless devotion. Sui Han laughed again. Huebo praised and praised Sage Zhuang, and finally changed his words, saying, "Since the girl is a disciple of Sage Zhuang, why not explore the blood mist with me?" Sui Han was stunned, "Hui!" Huebo leaned back a little, "Please stop. But I have no cultivation base." Huebo clenched a fist, "It is our obligatory responsibility to kill demons and demons. It's good for you to have a saint's heart." Suhan's face was blue and white. After a long time, he clenched his hands and bowed his head and said, "Xian Chong, Don't be kidding. Huibo sighed inwardly. If he directly attacked mortals, he wouldn't say anything about the punishment, it would also provoke a fight between Gushan and the East China Sea. If Sui Han is willing to accompany her into the blood mist, she can use the corpse puppet to solve this black heart lotus without knowing it. What a pity! Zhao Jianyi glanced at Sui Han with disdain. Such a long story, not pragmatic, and worthy of being a disciple of Shen Grenzuang. Hey you guys, don't hurry up and pack things, this blood fog is getting more and more dangerous, I don't know what changes will happen. If you want to die, don't drag us together. Sui Han didn't speak any more this time, and stood quietly in the shadows. Pu sneered. Based on her understanding of Suhan, this person must have been extremely annoyed. After the blood mist was over, she would spread the letter, add oil and jealousy, and provoke the contradiction between Suanman and Shen Grenzuang. The villagers hurried home after hearing Zhao Jianyi's words. Not long after, a bunch of pigs, dogs, and livestock gathered at the entrance of the ancestral hall. The villagers can't wait to bring all the pots and pans with them. Everyone is full of things. Between pushing and pushing, you step on me and I push you, dogs bite chickens and geese peck people. It's so lively. Huibo saw a person, his eyes dimmed slightly, and smiled and asked the village chief, "Who is that? Why is he in shackles?" The village chief said secretly, "It's the daughter-in-law of the first dog in the village. She is mad, so she has to be handcuffed." After everyone got together, Huibei realized that there were more than a dozen people in chains and handcuffs, and they were all women. Their expressions were open, with tears in their eyes and cotton cloths in their mouths, and they were staring at themselves closely. So many people have madness. The blood mist was thicker, and a little mist drifted in the wind. The people in the village couldn't help taking a few steps back, for fear of getting infected with such unknown things. Huibo was motionless, still smiling, and his eyebrows were like curved feathers, and he looked innocent and harmless. She pointed to the bound women and asked softly, her voice was like a pearl falling on a jade plate. Seeing that she was so amiable, the village chief let go of his hanging heart for a few minutes and said, "This madness can be contagious, so many people will be recruited without checking." When Huibo heard the words, his face was sorrowful. "It's really pitiful. It just happens that I'm a little familiar with the ambiguity. Why don't you let me diagnose and treat them?" The village head hurriedly waved his hand and refused. "Where are they, worthy? Don't dirty Xian Chang's hands." Huibo smiled, "Jane Yi, take out the things in their mouths for them." The head of the village was pale, and the villagers were also panicked. Zhao Jian walked up to a young woman, "Girl," offended. The son of Suinong rushed out, "This is my wife, cough cough, what is your big man touching?" He was named Sui Tiangong, and he was an inhuman tuberculosis. He was covering his lips and coughing intermittently. Zhao Jian took a few steps back, pinched his nose, glanced at him, raised his eyebrows with a smile instead of smiling, and said, "You tuberculosis ghost can still marry a wife." He coughed and died immediately. "Is there anyone willing to marry him?" "Ahem, what do you mean?" Zhao Jian paused in his footsteps, and moved behind him in an instant, and kindly patted him on the back, "Don't cough up your lungs." He took out the cotton cloth ball from the woman's mouth. "Xianchong, help me." The woman was free, and immediately asked for help. Zhao Jianyi bent over to untie the ropes on her wrists and feet, and said warmly, "But was forced to marry by this man." The woman knelt on the ground, weeping, "It's not just coercion, they kept me locked in the woodshed, refused to feed me, and tried to force me to give in." This woman speaks clearly and has clear logic. Where does she seem to be mad? Huibei glanced at the village chief with a smile, and walked to the woman, leaned over to lift her up, and said slowly, "Girls don't need to be afraid, speak slowly." When the woman saw her with a smile, her expression was amiable, the tension was loose, she wiped her tears, and said, "I am from Zhongcheng, and my surname is Xiao Tang." I met two old people at the lantern party begging me for a bite. I wanted to give a couple of pieces of silver, but they refused to say that they could not bear it, and then pointed to the small shop in the alley and asked me to go there to buy them some steamed buns. I went, but the people in the shop took me. At this point, Chu Xiaotang's tears fell, and he was choked up for a while. The smile on Huibo's face gradually cooled. Chu Xiaotang tremblingly begged, I have been missing for more than a month, and my parents don't know how to worry? They are only my daughter, Xian Chong, please help me. This is probably the cry for help I heard at Sunung's house. Pu calmly looked at the people present. The villagers were in a panic and were whispering. Zhao Jianyi was full of anger. He took advantage of this moment to untie the other women. The villagers wanted to stop him, but he stared at him severely and backed back in fright. Xian Chong, listen to me to explain. Huibei smiled and said, I don't need to explain. She glanced at the crying girls. Except for Chu Xiaotang, the other bound women looked very small, no more than 13 or 14, with immature faces. She was so pale that she could only cry in fright. Jane Yi, write down their names and places of origin. The villagers did not know what they had negotiated, but they united and stopped them. What are you going to do? Zhao Jianyi didn't have a good face. What do you do? Naturally, you rescued these people who were taken captive by you. Also, hand you over to the government. Pu smiled mockingly at the corner of her mouth. Yankan has been trafficking in people for so many years, how can the government not know this? Snakes and rats are just a nest. She's my daughter-in-law. Why are you stealing my daughter-in-law? Zhang Gaodan was a tall man, carrying a in one hand, and shouting with red eyes. Sui Tiangong coughed to death, cough cough cough, yet, cough cough, why are you? The villagers all agreed, yet, why are you? You come to bully us ordinary people because of your own immortality. Zhao Jian smiled angrily, why? He pointed to the group of girls who couldn't help crying, why did you kidnap them here? The villagers still refused to give in. Zhao Jianyi was too lazy to talk nonsense, and with a wave of his long sleeves, the villagers were fascinated and closed their eyes. Seeing that the woman was pulled away by Zhao Jian, Zhang Gaodan threw the and sat on the ground to play a rogue. This is my daughter-in-law. I bought the daughter-in-law who spent most of my life saving. I still count on her to give birth to me. What about the baby? And the girl he referred to as his wife was hiding behind Huibo in horror, sobbing and saying, I don't know him, I don't know him. I want my mother, oh, I want to go home. Zhang Gaodan's eyes widened, and his red neck yelled, how can you do this? It took me 30 taels of silver to buy you back. We all slept before, so why don't you recognize me? No matter, either refund or change. Otherwise you don't want to leave. Zhao Jianyi pointed at him angrily, do you think you did it right? Zhang Gaodan said aggrievedly, what's wrong? I don't steal or it. I save 30 taels of silver in my life. I buy good products and ask her to lay an egg for me. The villagers clamored, yes, we are all good people. We bought this. Why do you take it? Diao Min. It's lawless. Seeing that Zhang Gaodan couldn't stop the boy, he noticed that he hit the woman standing by. This woman looks gentle and amiable, she must be a talkative. He thought this way, stretched out his hand to grab the skirt of the woman, howled and said, Xian Chong, can't you be like this? A touch of azure like the sky passed by, Zhang Gaodan's eyes flashed, and his hand was empty. He blinked, and turned his head to see that the woman was already a few steps away, and the person was still smiling, kindly like a spring sun. Master, these unruly people are lawless. Let's stop talking nonsense with them. We will save them and go out quickly. Huibo nodded with a smile, looked at the silent child, and said softly, Pu, what do you want me to do? The child suddenly raised his head, and the water flickered in his round eyes, a look of panic. I don't know. Then I will rescue only these women, and the others will remain in the blood mist, what do you think? Huibai deliberately slowly teaches Pu so that she can learn to treat the wicked without being kind. The child was silent, squeezing the corners of his clothes tightly, feeling like a cub at a loss. Zhang Gaodan became more and more angry in his heart, and couldn't help crying. Wow, I have lost all the money I saved for a lifetime, and the wife I finally married is also gone. What am I still alive? Forget it when I die. He said that he was really banging his head. Pu's thoughts moved, taking advantage of the gloomy sky and everyone did not notice, sent Hongwu to secretly move a sharp stone and move it under Zhang Gaodan. The ground is soft soil, it doesn't hurt at all to hit it. Zhang Gaodan was knocking very vigorously, and suddenly heard a crisp sound, his brain was like an egg, and it snapped off cleanly. A pang of pain ensued. He raised his hand in a daze and saw that his hands were scarlet, yelled wow, rolled his eyes, and passed out. The villagers suddenly became agitated, the immortal Long is killing. The immortal Long is killing. Huibo ignored these scenes, but asked softly, Pu, what do you want to do? The child lowered his head and looked stubborn, with a pair of nice phoenix eyes drooping slightly, like a pitiful little beast. She clenched her hands and pressed her lips into a straight line, seeming to be making some kind of difficult choice. Master wants to let this group of people be so simple? But the heart is pure and kind, and the white jade is flawless. Huibo almost wanted to chop off his hand that made these 8 characters. This is where the white jade is flawless, it is clearly the Virgin's halo to cover the sky and sun. She took a deep breath, maintained the gentle smile on her face, and asked, but have you ever thought about it, if you keep these people's lives, how many women will be persecuted again, and how many families will be broken? She pointed to Chu Xiao Tang, like this elder sister, she helped the elderly out of kindness, but pushed herself and her parents into an unbearable situation. Do you have any regrets if you ask her? Chu Xiaotang nodded as if pounding garlic, I regret it very much. Huibo squatted down and opened the child's clenched hand. The palm of her hand was bleeding from her nails, revealing bright red flesh and blood. Bai stroked her wound lightly, with pity in her eyes thicker, and said helplessly, Pu, there are good people and evil people in this world. If you are kind to the wicked, you are to the good. Cruel, I know you are a good boy, but let these wicked people die easily, wouldn't it be cheaper for them? Pu held Huibo back, her eyes sparkling, and she seemed to finally make a decision, Master, you are right, I listen to your teachings. Huibo was startled slightly, seeing the child finally resuscitated, only to feel like a spring breeze, the whole body was comfortable, and then he smiled softly, come on, I'll take you out. She took Pu's hand, and Zhao Jianyi led the dozen or so women into the blood mist. When the villagers saw that they were about to leave, they wanted to stop them, but Huibo only looked over slightly, pressed by an extremely powerful and irresistible force. They immediately shook in cold sweat, and their bodies froze on the ground like a stone, unable to move at all. Only the mouth is constantly moving, still taking advantage of the tongue, and crying for mercy for a while. Sui Hanpa said in a loud voice, Xian Chong, I am a disciple of Shen Grenzhuang, if you ignore it, I'm afraid you will cause trouble to Gushan. Huibo let out a soft ah again, as if waking up from a dream, and slowly turned around, you are right. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and listened to her continuing to laugh and say, so I want to erase this memory from you. Even if it is Zhang Ru's call for souls, I won't find the clues. Zhang Cheng was surrounded by blood mist and collapsed. More than 10 golden core cultivators lived, but now it's not unusual to re-emerge and destroy a small village. Obviously she was smiling softly at Wen, but the villagers couldn't help trembling all over, as if they were seeing Azura from the underworld. How terrible this woman! But they didn't feel scared anymore. Just when the figure of Huibei and his group disappeared in the blood fog, The villagers were clever, you see me and I see you, don't know what happened. Why do you carry a pot behind you? How do I know? What do you do with 2 chickens in your hand? Where is that little bastard? Why haven't you come back? After walking through the bleeding fog, the group settled down in a nearby small town inn. These 12 or 13-year-old girls were finally free again, all of them were excited, sitting at the long table, chatting to the sky. Speaking of the crimes suffered in Yankan, he began to cry again. It's really noisy. Huibo sighed in his heart and glanced at the silent child beside him. Piu had washed her body and changed into clean clothes, her big eyes were very clear, as if she had changed herself. The more the child looks, the more satisfied he is, but it is too thin, just like a small milk cat. Junior sister, Zhao Jianyi, who shut herself in the room, finally walked out, carrying a blindfold-shaped wooden yanjie. I just made Zhou Gonggai for you. He put yanjie on his eyes. Demonstrating, that's it, after putting it on before going to bed, you can sleep peacefully all night. This thing is interesting. The whole body of yanjie is made of ebony wood, with fine patterns on the top, and gilded edges with inlaid patterns. When Piu took it, she found it was as light as a feather, with a touch of warmth in her hand, and she couldn't help but wonder, ah! Zhao Jian laughed loudly, you have also discovered that, right? Although this is made of extremely heavy ebony wood, it is very light in the hand, you see, he leaned over and pointed to the 2 convex points on yanjie. I put 2 spirit-devouring insects in these places, and then smeared the powder made of spirit stone on the surface of yanjie. In this way, spirit-devouring insects smell the spirit stone, they will fly up desperately. But the weight of yanjie is offset by the weight that they can bear, so it just stays in this state. He said simple, but in fact many calculations and measurements are very difficult. Piu Yuyanchu also knows a thing or two, and understands that even a disciple of the Momin 5 vessels, he may not be able to create this delicate gadget in just an hour. This teenager is not simple. Huibo looked at the dazed child and chuckled, where do your juniors know so much? Hurry up and pack your things and send these children back to their hometowns. I'll be alone in the flower viewing meeting. Zhao Jian cast her long eyebrows down, and let out a dejected Huibo was startled slightly, why? You want to go so? It's just a bunch of bad old men talking nonsense, very boring. Zhao Jian shook his head, it's nothing. Chu Xiaotang watched his words and thoughts, and when he saw it, he said hurriedly, since the immortal has something important, I will be responsible for sending them back home. No, Huibo groaned, you group of girls without the power to bind chickens are alone outside, and you don't know what gangsters will meet again. So, Jane, if you want to go to the flower fair, you will show it alone. City, I'll send them off. Master, I am not interested in the flower viewing fair, but... Zhao Jian sighed along, I heard from the people who went to the flower viewing fair last time that every guest who entered the venue can receive 10 top quality spiritual stones. I am absent and miss these 10 spiritual stones for nothing, alas. Huibai laughed softly, the last time I saw the flowers was in the East China Sea, the gang of Shen Grenzwang were rich and wealthy. It is not unusual for one person to give out 10 top quality spirit stones. But this time it is in Xiancheng. You forgot the rules of Momin. Is there a clause in it that means saving? Zhao Jian opened his mouth, and it took a long time before he sighed in panic, I have waited for 10 years, so I won't go. Huibo nodded with a smile, moved his eyes to Piu, and groaned, your junior can never walk around with you. Why not? I built a wooden wagon for the junior sister, so she can catch up with me. Huibo paused slightly while holding the cup, and glanced at the enthusiastic young man. Somehow, Zhao Jianyi could see a bit of contempt from the faint look in his eyes. She took a sip of the tea in her hand, and said slowly, I'm just worried that I'm tired of Pu. Zhao Jian was hit hard, oh. Huibo took the child by the hand, very worried and worried, "Your junior is a good boy." Zhao Jianyi echoed, "He is indeed a good boy. It's a pity that I was too kind and never fortified people. I really don't worry about it." Hui Bai was worried, not willing to let the child run with Zhao Jian, and was not worried about leaving her alone. "Master," Pu pursed her lips, "I just stay here and wait for you." She just agreed to leave with Huibo, knowing that this person was about to attend the flower viewing party. For as long as a few months or as long as a year, the master will have no time to take care of himself. Huibo shook his head, "If you don't succeed, you can't succeed. I know you are a compassionate teacher, but if you are so young, if you are not looked after by someone, you don't know what you will suffer." Pu. She struggled, "I can really be alone." Huibo touched his head, with more pity in his eyes, "Good boy, you are so caring, and you are more reluctant to be a teacher." Pu lowered her head, and finally chose to remain silent. Chu Xiaotang interrupted and said, "Xianzhong, let me take care of my sister here." She thought that Huibei would decline, but she didn't expect the fairy to look over with a smile, then nod her head, "Okay, come on. Is it so simple?" Huibo smiled and said, "Miss Zhao, you are such a good person." Chu Xiaotang pulled up the corners of his mouth stiffly, and silently swallowed such words as, "You are so kind to me, this is what I should do, the immortal does not need to be so polite, let alone accept me as a guide, and I am flattered and flattered." Under. Zhao Jianyi was also relieved and thanked him, "Miss Zhao, you are such a good person. I will help you send the message to Zhongcheng first, so that your parents will no longer worry. I will trouble you to stay here and take care of my sister." "It should be." Huibo took Pu's hand and walked to the street. The sky was fascinating with the drizzle. Huibo held a paper umbrella in his hand and leaned to the side to completely cover the child. The green feathers on his shoulders smeared the rain, like the clear waves are clear, and the green shadow obliquely invades the tender grass, which is very beautiful. "Pu, you stay here first. After a while, Jian Yi will come and pick you up to Gushan." Huibo looked down at the child, his green eyebrows narrowed, and the clear water in his eyes, "Take care of yourself." Pu nodded and said, "Goodbye, master, you must also take care of yourself." The child has a serious face, his short arms are raised up, his thin body is bent into a bow, and he salutes solemnly. This short-legged and short-handed man just pretends to be an adult, which is really cute. Huibo covered his lips and couldn't help but smile and bend a pair of apricot eyes. "Hey, be obedient." She left the umbrella for the child, and walked slowly into a curtain of drizzle and slanting wind, with long sleeves and slightly bulging, the blue feathers were blowing with the wind, and the waist was ringed by Ling Ling. "Sounds like a man in the sky." Pu still bends long, only slightly raised her head, watching the ray of spring go away. Huibo seemed to feel something, and quietly looked back, Yujiyu, overwhelming the city with smoky and sparse willows. She smiled and beckoned to Pu, "I will definitely be back." Huibo has been gone for a long time, Pu still leaned over respectfully and did not move half a step. Chu Xiaotang held the umbrella for her, looked up at the sky and the spring rain, looked down at the girl like a stone, and wanted to ask whether her waist was sore or not. After a while, her wrist holding the umbrella became sore, the child still did not move, and finally couldn't help reminding, "Sister, Immortal Chang has gone. When do you want to worship?" Pu straightened up, ignored the hustle and bustle around him, and walked straight to the inn. Chu Xiaotang was taken aback by her, and hurried away in small steps, holding an umbrella for her. "Sister, do you want to eat candied haws?" Chu Xiaotang asked softly, pointing to the rosy candied haws. In her impression, no child does not like to eat this snack. Pei Yu glanced at her coldly, her eyes icy. Chu Xiaotang stood still immediately, his blood was frozen, his whole body was trembling, and his teeth trembled. Such terrifying eyes! She had never seen it even with those wicked men in Yankan. The umbrella in her hand fell silently to the ground, and a few muddy water splashed on her pale pink skirt, but she didn't care about it, and all her brains were circling terrible, terrible, terrible. After he recovered, Peo was no longer visible. Chu Xiaotang picked up the umbrella and hurried forward, yelling, "Little fairy! She has changed her name without knowing it." Peo ignored the call behind her, picked up the ghost mask on her waist and placed it on her face, and then her body stretched like a flower branch, slowly becoming taller and thinner. Chu Xiaotang ran over in a panic, and suddenly looked at a woman in a black robe standing upright on the empty street. The child is nowhere to be seen. She looked around, there was no fork in this street, couldn't Xiaoxian Cheng escape? "Girl, can you see a little girl about 7 or 8 years old passing here?" "Never." The man's voice was strange and hoarse and vague. Chu Xiaotang became alert and stared at her. The woman's figure is tall and thin, like a lone crane in the rain, with her long hair pouring down like a waterfall, and she vaguely sees the tiny silver threads in it, and her black robe is blowing in the wind. "There is only one road here, how come you haven't seen her?" Chu Xiaotang thought of Yankan's experience, and immediately shouted, "Are you a kidnapper?" The storm was swift and the dark clouds rolled. The woman turned a deaf ear and moved forward. Chu Xiaotang hurried over, "Hey! You!" Her voice stopped abruptly, her body was shaking, her lips turned pale, and she looked at the woman in front of her in fear. The mottled crimson scars on this man's face seemed to have been bitten by some fierce beast, and not even an inch of skin was intact. There are only double autumn water-like eyes, flashing like cold stars, which makes people wonder that maybe she was a beauty before. The woman glanced at Chu Xiaotang lightly, and slowly walked into the rain. Chu Xiaotang stood blankly, holding his breath, for fear that if he accidentally made some movement, this Shura would raise his hand and kill himself like a crushing ant. She must be able to do such a thing. After a long time, Chu Xiaotang sat down on the ground, ignoring the dirt and sewage, and then dared to cry. "These people are so terrible, woo woo woo." Peo walked to the outskirts and blew a whistle. The drizzle was like smoke, and the paddy fields crisscrossed. She stood quietly with her hand in hand, and a little scalper ran with 4 hoofs, arching her hand affectionately. "You know who I am." She took off the ghost mask, still hung it around her waist, and then straddled the scalper's back and drove it towards the blood mist. Many years ago, Peo was still a fairy of Yunwei with a lonely mountain and glorious wind. When she travelled out of the mountain, it coincided with the siege of the corpse puppet. The tide of corpses is like the sea, and the small infinite city is like an island in the sea, trapped for several days. There is a corpse king in the corpse puppet, whose cultivation is close to Yuan Ying's great power. He stopped all the blazing feathers from the city, and then surrounded it without killing, hoping to torture the people in the city to death. The city lord and his followers have all been killed in battle, and the people in the city stood on the wall with pale faces, already giving up hope. Dark clouds pressed against the city, and the sky was gloomy. The girl in white is like a ray of light in despair, slowly walking down from the clouds. Holding a beautiful carmine knife, she said slowly, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." After speaking, she walked into the tide of corpses like a sea, 1 person, 1 knife. The kind-hearted people realized that she was only a golden core cultivation base, and hurriedly said, "The immortal Long. There is a corpse king in it, it is close to Yuanying, and even the city lord is dead. You go alone, I'm afraid." The girl looked back and chuckled, Li's eyebrows soothing, blooming like peach blossoms. She only said, "Don't be afraid." After 3 days and nights, the corpse puppet retreated like a tide, and the girl slowly walked out of the clouds with a knife. He was dressed in white, not stained with dust. Only the long and slender knife in his hand was dripping with blood. No one knows how a golden core monk killed the nascent soul corpse king. The corpse king is immortal, powerful, and proficient in hundreds of Taoism. But after 3 days and nights, he became a puddle of flesh. More than just killing, this is simply a torture. Gu Shenruki became famous in the first battle. Later someone sang like this: the sword is like a blood moon, and the head is a wine glass. Going to the feast alone, drinking all the blood of the enemy. As the wind and rain grew stronger, the girl sat on the back of the cow with a smile on her mouth, and rushed into the tossing blood mist without hesitation. The lips moved, not "Don't be afraid," but "The hunt has begun."